My name's Mark Ratcliffe. I'm here with Brian Kelly. We're at the People's Chronicle, and our podcast is Sustaining Our Future. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You've been doing a lot over the course of the last year or so, and I just wanted to catch up with you and see where you are and kind of let our viewers know what you're doing and what's going on in the great city of Reading.
Right on.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up in Philadelphia?
No, actually, my folks are from New York. I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island.
Okay.
Until I was 18, I moved to Philly.
You went to school in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Okay, got your bachelor's at the University of Philadelphia?
University of Pennsylvania, yeah.
Pennsylvania, okay.
Business school, actually. So.
Yeah, I've heard of it. And then you got your master's in Vermont?
Yeah, ecological economics was the focus there.
Okay, and what did you want to do with that?
Well, up until I did my master's program, I was working in community development in the city of Philadelphia and realized that there's all these small gains. You can get a few affordable houses built here. You can get a couple of additional jobs created there, but you weren't really making a bigger impact on the larger macroeconomic system, which is like changing the way we function. It just meant that those resources got taken away from another community. So I wanted to understand, what does economic development mean inside the context of a sustainable planet?
Mm-hmm. I understand why you're in our area, because we have a lot of opportunity here, which is great. And then you've been working on a project, ReDesign Reading, which is what you're in charge of. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was actually what attracted me coming here. The city of Reading, along with 5 of its main municipal authorities, got together and looked at some critical questions that said, well, economic development impacts the way we do business, and the way that we do business impacts the way that economic development can happen. So how are we going to do that in the 21st century, recognizing these planetary limits? So they said, we need an entity in the city that's going to really focus on instigating that type of economic development here in the city. I would say that I'm pushing them a little bit more towards green, but that's originally what created ReDesign Reading, was this amalgamation of different municipal entities that's had a little bit of vision and said, we need something driving this.
Sure. There seem to be a number of organizations working on the redevelopment of Reading. And I know one of your early goals was to try to get those organizations working together a little bit more. How's that gone?
I would say I cannot take credit for them working together, but there's actually some collaboration that predates me. So a lot of the economic development partners have been working for a long time in the county, particularly. So your economic partnerships, your development funds, the city of Reading itself, the county planning. But their focus has historically been what is traditional economic development, bricks and mortar, jobs created. And that's how you measure success. And at the end of the day, that's it. The whole purpose of the Community Development Corporation is to say, how can we focus resources in the city itself? Not so much the county, but how are we redefining the needs of the city and the goals of the city to make sure that we can do a development that makes sense here instead of pie in the sky type of stuff.
Sure. So how are we doing that?
With magic.
Okay.
No. So one of the important components of ecological economics, it's a different framing of economics. Economics oftentimes measures supply and demand, but in an unbounded context. So there's no actual rules, so it assumes that natural resources are unlimited. So there's all types of perversions of how do you start quantifying and putting prices on natural resources, but that doesn't account for the fact that if you take out too many components of a system, it will collapse. So ecological economics says you have to place economics inside of an ecological framework and say this planet has natural boundaries, and we have to think about how we grow our economy in a way that basically reflects that reality, that you were taking natural resources on the front end and we're creating waste on the back end. Mm-hmm. So my approach to economics is, if we're looking at that as a reality, we can't just say growing the size of the economy is beneficial, as itself. We have to look at, are we reducing the amount of natural resources that we're using? Are we creating efficiencies in the way that we use them? And are we reducing the waste on the back end? So it's that kind of systems flow that is really important. So what does that mean for Reading? Because that's kind of, okay, great, that's cool in a book. But that means looking at ways that we localized supply chains. How are the things that we're producing in Reading, how can we make sure that they are being utilized here in Reading as much as possible? Things like small companies. There's a company here that just moved to the city a few months ago called eCycle, which is producing an anti-idling technology that's specifically for vehicles. It costs a lot to buy a hybrid. They're using lithium batteries. They've created a technology right here in the county. They're located in the city that takes the load off of your engine for specific idling kind of components or whatever. This is above my kind of understanding. But basically this technology then reduces our carbon footprint and at a much more cost-effective rate than switching to a lithium battery. So it's small things like that. How do we encourage that type of company and that type of manufacturing to grow here as opposed to just traditional old high-intensity uses?
So, aside from bringing new economy to the area, what are the challenges of Reading that you've come up against that you think are the things that we need to work together to try to overcome?
My first 3 months here, the first thing I realized was a lot of historic trauma here. There's a lot of people who have
What
been
do you
here.
mean by that?
A lot of people who have been here for a long time and who have seen initiatives tried and failed, which then has them in this kind of relative feeling of, well, we've already tried lots of stuff and nothing's working. So it's us, it's this place, it's these other people, and the kind of very much saying, yeah, this could work in other places, but here in Berks County, we can never make it happen. Here in the city, we can't for X, Y, and Z, specific trait of the city. Well, I lived in Philadelphia. I was doing work down in Sao Paulo. I was doing work in Guatemala. I've been up in Burlington, Vermont. It's the same in all these places. Everyone's like, well, it's this particular trait of us or these people that I'm trying to partner with, and there's a reason we can't do it. Well, that's nonsense as far as I'm concerned.
So true.
So that's really where I see it, is kind of starting to break that narrative of we can't. And that's a lot of what our first year has been, is just saying, all right, well, what can we do? And so a lot of our job is to figure out where is there a little bit of energy and where is there some underutilized resources, pull those together and say, okay, this is happening.
Sure.
Oh, this is happening here.
Yeah.
And as an aggregate, then we're starting to change that conversation.
Sure. There have been a lot of positive things that have happened in the area, and I think taking all those positive wins and talking about it and kind of getting that going, and I think that's a big thing that the People's Chronicle are trying to point out, those positive wins, and talk to people who have had successes and build that up, and what you're doing is great in that same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Now, I mean, and I'm not some sort of ungrounded pie in the sky like, oh, everything's great and right, look at all these good things that we're doing. In fact, the first time I read something like Yes Magazine, I was annoyed at it. I was like, what the heck is this? It's just positive examples of stuff that's going on. Like, there's so many other problems, but it really is a matter of where we're focusing our energy. So there are issues in Reading. There are issues specifically with the workforce, levels of education, all things that we need to address. But if we just focus on those, which are large problems, which are not endemic just to Reading, they're across the country in post-industrial cities, then we're not going to get where we need to go. We're going to focus our energy on what we can do.
Sure. You don't get anything done during the day by laying in bed saying, I'm never going to be able to get this done. You just have to get up and do it. And that's how we need to accomplish things in the city, is just by getting up and doing it. So you had touched on really, I think, a lot of what sustainability is all about in your economic model there. One of my questions was, what is sustainability to you? And I think you actually already outlined it. But I've heard you quote about a larger sustainability framework. What does that mean?
So it's nice to kind of laid out the broad scope. For something like a city, there's you have to figure out, everybody uses the word sustainability. Corporations are using it like, this is sustainably produced. And it doesn't have any meaning anymore. Nobody knows what sustainability means. They just mean, in general, green. If you're a little bit to the right of the spectrum, you say, oh, that's some leftist. They're talking about sustainability, like it doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, this question about sustainability is, how are we measuring it and what are we choosing to measure? So for me, it's this combination of the economic sustainability, the social sustainability, and the environmental sustainability. And that's their traditional Venn diagram where those three intersect. And you might have a place that's saying, doing a great job preserving its natural resources, and then have no jobs available because it's a lot of great preserved land. So it's the combination of things. It's like that they're doing a great job in environmental sustainability, but then there might be no economic vitality in the area at all. And one could argue, in that place, maybe we don't need it. But in a place like Reading, we need to look at all three of those pieces and how we measure them.
Right. And I often use the example of overfishing a pond. if you fish it to the point that there are no more fish, well, then you have nothing to eat moving forward. So you need to keep it sustainable and make sure you don't overfish that one area.
Yeah, and actually fishing in a pond is a really great example. So I'll just, there's a longtime community organizer and community development practitioner, Ed Whitfield, who I had the pleasure of hearing at a conference about a year ago. And he broke the entire economy down into fishing poles and watering holes. And there's a question about access that is a really critical one here in our country, which is saying that in addition to overfishing the pond, we have to say who controls access to the pond, who controls access to the fishing poles, and are we doing that in a just and equitable way? And that's where the social sustainability side really comes in, which is really important.
That's a great analogy. I love that. Well, listen, you are doing some amazing things in the area. I really appreciate you spending some time here and talking about it. And I think we're going to have to extend this a little bit more coming up. Thank you. We are going to be back in the future with Brian and look forward to seeing you again soon.